Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for the Center of Refugee Studies for conducting this timely discussion. So I'm here to hopefully convey to you a perspective of a community organization that has been sort of advocating what they know to be true to the rest of the general public. So I'm not here to put any position beyond that is maybe mine, and I'll sort of try to tell you when it's my opinion and an opinion of our community organization. So my presentation is, in order for me to sort of match up to my colleagues, I used the power of PowerPoint. So bear with me, it's a simple PowerPoint. I'm just going to go over pretty much how information was received by our organization, and then how we sort of mobilized and what tasks that we had to take on, either voluntarily or just because a need arose. So before we move into the MV Sun, which is the boat that docked on August 13th, I'm sure most of you remember the Ocean Lady that came in last October 17th with 76 Tamil asylum seekers, all men. So as soon as the information sort of came out to the public light, the drums started beating, and many Sri Lankan government agents or affiliates started to allege that these were all remnants of the Tigers, and they were rebranding and regrouping in Canada to cause havoc. And even the community organization, which had very little information about this, saw this as a maybe a credible allegation, because what we see is 76 males coming in at once. Could this be true? So just as the Canadian public was sort of unsure of what sort of was happening, we took that same positions. But we had a couple of our members, Canadian Tamil Congress members, fly over to Vancouver and try to make contact with these refugees. And initially there was some problems with making contact because of national security concerns, but through negotiation with CBSA members and through the help of Duty Council acting as an intermediary, we were able to make some contact with the refugees. I'll go into the details of what we learned from the refugees later on, but I'll just keep on moving through the lens of what the Canadian public knew in the beginning too. So 76 refugees came on board the Canadian territory. They were all being alleged as remnants of the LDT. The Canadian government initially started holding all of them on detention reviews, and over several detention reviews, all of them were held, and to a point where the government was also using Section 86 of the IRPA to say that there's some secret evidence, and that this will come out in a hearing later on, and that they have evidence, clear evidence, that these refugees could be security concerns. So by January of 2010, slowly some of the refugees started being left out, and by January 2010, all of the 76 members were let go, and the CBSA also admitted that they did not have any evidence. So whether the government relied on solely on the allegations of the Sri Lankan government to make this in a detention review, or whether they had some suspicions themselves, eventually they processed that suspicions and allegations and came to a conclusion that there was no evidence connecting these 76 men to any security concerns. And currently, all these 76 men are waiting, some with work permits, some without, for their detention reviews, and none to this date have violated any of their conditions put on them. So that was the Ocean Lady. And then on August 13th, the MV Sun docked in BC. And in this boat now, now a much larger amount of refugees are here. So now we have about 492 refugees with approximately 63 women and 49 children that came on this boat. again, so concerns of them being terrorists, concerns of the idea of queue jumping the immigration system now, and the idea that human smugglers are taking advantage of the generosity of Canadian system started being the talking points made by various people, including the Canadian government. And so later on, I will sort of try to just talk about these issues from a community perspective and where we stand. So these sort of concerns started to dominate the predominant topic, and CTC mobilized both last year and this year due to need, due to the fact that this really hadn't happened before to this scale, and we felt that the Canadian government would need to, and the public in general, would need to know both perspectives, because at that point, all the perspective was coming from the Sri Lankan government, and from what Craig has said in his presentation, there is enough credible suspicions and allegations to note that the Sri Lankan government is an interested party in declaring these asylum seekers as undesirables. So what CTC had to move through is two phases, two different helms. One was the administrative assistance it provided, and two was the informing the public, informing the community members at large, and informing parts of the Canadian government as best as we could. So I'm going to take you to both. The first one is the administrative assistance, and obviously because of the need, because this type of immediate need the government and the public in general might not have been able to handle, CTC facilitated several things, including connecting asylum seekers, families, and their councils. So we have to understand that these refugees came on board, and most of them or none of them could speak the English language. So there's only a certain amount of translators available to translate the rights and responsibilities of the refugees. So not anybody can be a translator as well. So what CTC went and did was took official documents that spoke of rights and refugees, rights and responsibilities of refugees, translated for them. Also families, a lot of families didn't know who was on board, and because of security concerns, it wasn't being publicized to the public either. So after the CTC was able to have meetings, they started collecting names of the refugees and trying to connect them to the families so that the families can get ready for the process that was going to occur. A simple thing is collect call. The refugees, one, didn't have the money to make collect calls, and two, didn't know how to make collect calls to reach out to their families. So providing small but needed assistance in this kind of respect. Thirdly, only I think out of the first boat, out of the 76, a dozen or so did not have any family members in Canada. So what we did was, in anticipation that this might have happened, that not all might have family members, the CTC and other organizations made a call out to find anybody who's generous enough to provide sureties and money for bonds to get the ones without families or friends here out on bail. So, and also worked with CBSA to facilitate as a community sort of intermediary. One, not only trying to tell the community's concern to the CBSA, but also letting the community at large know that the CBSA is taking great care of the asylum seekers. They're being provided care and explaining to them the process of the refugees. So this was the administrative aspect. The more difficult aspect, I would say, was the informing the public. There was three hums that we had to sort of bring out to the light, which one was informing people about the actual Sri Lankan situation. Everybody remembers last year the protest by Tamils, and we all know that was not taken in some by many people and not in the right light, and the information there got focused on the actions of certain members of the protests, in more so than why the protests were happening. So we had to sort of re-educate people on the situation that these refugees could possibly have left Sri Lanka. Second, and about the refugees themselves, because of this terrorist brand was immediately thrown at them, we had to slowly sort of bring in what these refugees and give individualized stories of these refugees as well. And third, which was more predominant now, which is the discourse surrounding this topic. We had to sort of disentangle the discourse that sort of took precedent over the actual needed discussion. So I'm going to just quickly go over the three things that we went over. The situation in Sri Lanka. So in 2009, when the first boat came out, I know there's going to be enough said, so I'm just going to leave it at this quote by the US State Department in 2009. When they were sort of collecting information in regards to the incidents that happened, and shortly following, the US State Department had this to say, that there are allegations that the government of Sri Lanka restrictions on access were part of a systematic attempt to hide violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses. Some governments and organizations that were contacted during the preparation of this report indicated that they had additional information that may pertain to relevant incidents, but were unwilling to provide it at this time for a variety of reasons, including fears for the safety of their sources. So just by this quote, we can sort of ascertain when a sovereign nation is sort of afraid to just, give out sources because of the safety of their sources, there is some sort of, if we hold these reports to be true and these statements to be true, we have to understand that there was at that moment some fear for a certain group of people. What group of people we'll talk about later, but a certain group of people. And in 2010, so the government had made progress in the last year and had stated that they've resettled these people and the economy is booming, and so now, okay, maybe in 2009 there was some problems, but now we're all fixed and we're better. So, and even in 2010 there was reports, limited reports because there's limited access, but reports also made, and I just wanted to point you to two, which the first one is the Amnesty International report in 2010, and stating that the government continued to carry out enforced disappearances as part of its counterinsurgency strategy. Enforced disappearances were reported in many parts of the country, particularly in the north and eastern Sri Lanka and in Colombo, and these are the three dominant areas where Tamils reside in Sri Lanka. Another report by the International Crisis Group entitled War Crimes in Sri Lanka stated that the government restricted and tightly monitored access to the UN and for humanitarian agencies from July 2009 and barred the ICRC. The ICRC, I'm sure most of you know, is mandated to have full access to all conflict areas. So barring ICRC is a move that should never be done, and especially post-conflict, whether they came from post-conflict. So the report says till May 2010, ICRC is still banned, and that there's still 80,000 civilians in camps. So this type of situation is still prevalent in Sri Lanka right now. The fact that there's people displaced in camps, in sort of internment camps, in sort of places where they are in sort of limbo without access to any international agencies. We can only imagine the stories that are coming from here. So in that sense, I will leave it at that. That there is genuine concern. I'm not asserting that all these refugees and asylum seekers have that concern, but it definitely shows that anybody, whether you're a Tamil or Sinhalese or Muslim, anybody that sort of goes against the government interest or whatever the government sees that its interests are, is definitely in fear of their life. So, I'll move on now to the story of the refugees quickly. Common thread, we spoke to several of the refugees on both boats. The common thread was that everyone we spoke to had lost family members. Some children lost parents, parents lost some or most of their children. Several had injuries. There's a the 2-year-old toddler right now who, at 3 months old, had shrapnel lodged in his skull during the fighting last year, and the mother, unable to seek treatment, could not do anything about it, and so the child grew with shrapnel in his skull for the last year and a half, and CBSA has discovered that, and we're moving forward. So there's many stories like this. Other males who have shrapnel in their skulls, in their hips, and so there is a lot of serious injuries, serious claims that could add to or maybe even work against them. But refugee claims that these refugees are making have some evidence to substantiate. Whether the veracity of these evidence have to be determined through due process. And another common thread that came out was while they were in Sri Lanka, they were being sort of shifted around in these sort of limbo stages where their women were sort of who lost their husbands, were subject to sexual violence, no international organizations. So all these situations are there. Whether all these situations amount to an asylum claim, whether that subjectively made them feel that they have to run away from Sri Lanka to save their lives, that is a determination that, on an individual case basis, that hopefully the IRB will go through in the next few weeks. And the last things, the discourse surrounding the asylum seekers. There's 3 discourses. One is that they're terrorists. Hopefully we can sort of take caution in and understand who is propagating the idea that these are terrorists. It is coming directly from the Sri Lankan government or its agent. And no one has a more benefit than to discredit any refugees than the source country that the refugees are fleeing from. So if we take that into its context and also look at the last refugee boat that arrived here, we can see that that we don't have to brush them all with that one stroke of terrorists. I mean, whether there's 1 or 2 undesirables or more, that is a process that our judiciary, and I strongly believe in our judiciary, could definitely weed out. And so that the whole terrorist, and as a personal note, I want to also address the idea of the Tamils regrouping. We all know that the Tigers were defeated in May 2009, and I want to say that this is a personal observation as a community member, and this is not a CTC position at all. But after the loss of the Tigers in May 2009, the Sri Lankan government has been repeatedly saying the Tigers are regrouping here, they're regrouping in Canada, they're regrouping in all these countries. But if you look at the organizations that they are referring to, one, the Transnational Government of Tamil Eelam. This is probably the most openly transparent organization that has arisen after this, the demise of the Tigers. The Tigers have demised, but the fight for independence by the Tamil people has not been addressed. So, but without addressing Tamil independence, and when I say Tamil independence, I do not mean strictly a separate state, a sort of self-determination is what I speak to, and that can take many forms. That sort of desire which sparked the civil war in the last 30 years has not still been addressed, and until it is, there will be people mobilizing. But right now there has been no evidence of violence insurgents being mobilized. It is more of a political, and all the groups that the Sri Lankan government is being pointing to is a political mobilization. The transnational government that they speak to had its inaugural meeting in Philadelphia. So I mean, this is not something that is going behind the shadows. They're trying to mobilize in a democratic way. So that's my 2 cents in this whole terrorist allegations that have been throwing around. The next one is queue jumping, and I'll move forward quickly because I know I'm running out of time. I think the rest of the panel will speak better with the idea whether genuine refugees are queue jumping. Canadian immigration laws sort of have understood that not all refugees will be able to make their claims and applications from a different country. Some might have to self-select and move to the country and come here without authorization. Our refugee processing system addresses that issue, and so whether genuine refugee claimants are queue jumping, I'm going to sort of leave it for the rest of the panel to discuss that. And lastly, smugglers. That's definitely a concern I think all Canadians share. As a Canadian, I think it's despicable that anybody would exploit the miseries of people and try to make a profit on that. We support anyone's sort of direction in making sure that the smugglers are not empowered to make this. But I would like to caution that by criminalizing smugglers, we should not start criminalizing the refugees that are seeking these smugglers as a last refuge, and that maybe the best way to do this is to cut the line to the smugglers by addressing and having policies that would not allow that will allow refugees to seek other avenues, such as making Sri Lanka a source country where Tamils can apply directly, and so we can process these applications and remove the desirables and the genuine claims from the undesirable claims. Without addressing those kind of policies and just trying to attack smugglers, you're always going to have people exploiting the system. And I think it would be a better way to move forward is to have and address the situation at hand. And lastly, this is a quote I just recently read on the ICG group. It says, it was a recommendation by the group to what countries should do, and one of the recommendations, it says grant asylum or other protected status to witnesses and act to preserve the evidence of war crimes, particularly by allowing officials to cooperate with credible investigations. And this is on a personal note because I lost family members during the war, and the frustration that was obviously present in last year's protests and still sort of is boiling around is based on the idea that accountability has not been reached yet. In some minute level would be better than no accountability. The Sri Lankan government is constantly denying anything. They still keep to that claim that they have not shed 1 ounce of blood after all of this has happened. So that type of a crime followed by a full-out denial frustrates people, and we have to understand that many of these asylum seekers could be possible future war crimes witnesses. The UN is pursuing and possibly going after what to do with the allegations that there have been heavy war crimes in Sri Lanka, and we could be holding future war crime witnesses to prosecute such war crimes. And I think in that regard, it would be incumbent on us to protect these people. So thank you for that.